Hey again, and welcome back. It's Ryan Miller with Etna Interactive. Question for you today is, how smart are you really? So we're going to talk about how smart practices today are tracking their calls. Now, the thing you have to understand, let's kind of lead in with a story. Where does this all come from? A couple of years back, we had a client who'd been with us for a very long time, and we decided to start tracking calls as a way to get a better read on how we were doing with lead generation. Now, we recorded calls as well, but the doctor assured us, it's not really necessary. My staff is fantastic. Well, sure enough, we were a few calls in, and the quality of service that was being delivered was exceptional. But here's roughly what transpired. The caller says, hey, I've been referred directly to the doctor for my tummy tuck, but I'm really scared of general anesthesia. Does the doctor do a tummy tuck without anesthesia? Now, at this point, the woman who answered the phone, she kind of lowers the phone. We hear her whisper to a colleague, does our doctor do a tummy tuck without anesthesia? And the colleague, you can hear them in the background, says, gosh, I really don't think so. At which point, the receptionist raises the phone back to her head and says, gee, I'm sorry, our doctor just doesn't do that. Now the patient pleads. She says, but I've heard such great things about your doctor. And the staff says back again, I'm just really sorry, and hangs up the phone. Now, we have to ask ourselves in that interaction what went wrong. And the answer is a lot of things went wrong. We didn't have a clear enough path for the staff to escalate their question to leadership. But most importantly, we didn't capture the name and the contact information for that patient so that we had the chance to help them and help them become a patient in the future. Now, let's talk about how big of an issue this is. When we look at the stats today for what's happening online, 50 to 70% of all of your inquiries today are happening specifically through the phone. And this is increasing as we see that mobile visitation is on the rise. So we have to acknowledge that if you're a smart practice leader, that measurement is in fact the key to success. And the thing that we have to really kind of take a look at, questions that we might answer as we're looking at the idea of tracking our phone calls, is asking first, what fraction, if any, of our calls are going unanswered? One of the things that call tracking illuminates for us is the pattern of activity on the phone during the hours of the day. And what we've seen is we've watched these calls, they initiate, they don't connect, and that prospect runs away. Call tracking can also help us understand which of our calls can be attributed to different investments. And specifically here at Etna, we're really interested to understand what fraction of those calls are attributable to the investments that you're making in online marketing. Now, we also need to understand, and as again, a smart business leader, hopefully you want to know this, of all the calls that we're receiving from prospects, what fraction are ultimately being recorded in our systems? Because if we're not recording those inquiries as opportunities, we're never going to have a chance to monetize those inquiries down the road. Now, we start looking as well, like how long are patients waiting to connect? During peak periods, it's just as bad as not answering the call at all, forcing them to wait for 10, 15, or 20 rings before we actually provide them with service. So those are all things that we can begin to understand better when we're tracking calls. And of course, the thing that we're all generally, especially as business owners and practice leaders, concerned about is how well is the team representing our brand every time they talk to a prospective patient online. So we also have to understand, in this era of reputation being so important, that the first call can very often be the last. Now, I'll let you take a second here to sort of drink in this review and understand, what is this patient talking about? Well, unfortunately, we see reviews just like this all too often. A scenario where the prospective patient, initiates a call with the office and the service is so below their expectation that they choose not only to abandon their interest in your practice, but to actually take their discontent to the public web and share that experience with the rest of the world. So the thing that you have to understand as we look at call tracking, is this is the opportunity for you to arm your practice, to arm your owners and your practice leaders with more insight and more understanding about how your team is performing as it relates to your phone calls. Now, it's really quite simple. Step one, we provision a phone number and we add it to all of the places where your phone number is displayed on your site. Step two, we take the time to carefully, securely record that information. Step three, we go back, we audit that information, connecting the calls with the staff and measuring how we're performing with each one of those calls that's connected. So how does that help us? Well, I think, as we've already talked about, it helps us to understand how we can market smarter. Where and how are we profiting from the investments we're making online, and what's actually driving inquiries back to the practice? It's going to allow us to spot where we have opportunities to train and develop our staff elevating their skills so they continue to provide ever better performance. And of course, we do all of this because we hope to see better revenues for our practice. So reach out to us if you have any questions or interest in activating call tracking for your site or service. You know how to get a hold of us. You can subscribe to our email newsletter, find us on social media, and of course, we welcome as well your emails and your phone calls directly. Have a great day.